What's up, everyone? This is Political Ideas and Thoughts, and in this episode, we're not going to be going over political positions so much as we're going to be going over understanding the left and how the left has gone into such the rabbit hole that they've gone into and why this has happened. Because they really have gone into this rabbit hole. And there's no real, reason, there's no real sense behind it if you don't understand spiral dynamics or you don't understand their motivations and their positions. And more so also about connecting these ideas together. So I'm going to try and do this with this episode because I think this is really important, and it's not. And spiral dynamics as a whole isn't really talked about at all. So I decided to do this episode a couple days ago, but or maybe it was like 2 days ago, but I just now got up to courage to do it. So, what has caused these problems? Why is the left fallen into such a rabbit hole of intersectionality? If anybody doesn't know what that is, you can look it up. This is basically a radical branch of, I wouldn't even necessarily call it the left. I would almost call it more of a cult or a really strong religion, characterized by beliefs and almost this idea that everybody is racist and everybody is sexist and and like things that most people would be like completely against. So I'm going to start by explaining the underlying reason why this has happened, why the left has gotten into such a rabbit hole. So when it comes to the left, there's a certain idea that they hold to be true, and then because the left used to be, at least most in a lot of ways, open-minded, and in some ways they're still kind of open-minded, but they're not open-minded in the same way as they used to be, and they're only open-minded to things that resonate with this ideology that they've taken in. So basically there's a sort of a thing that Stage Green does, and it basically says no position is primitive or invalid or wrong or necessarily right. They don't necessarily completely hold with this idea completely, but they have this idea that if you are with us, if you have these ideas that are similar to ours, we won't necessarily go against you because we all believe in the same thing, saving the planet or installing and creating better making things better for other people and things like this. Particularly this idea of there's no such thing as good and bad or primitive or things like this. What it created was a chance for radicalization to slip through. Not because the left itself is radicalized. Well, they are now, but that's another subject. But because of these ideas that we are basically. Hold on, let me turn this fan down a little bit. That we are basically, there's no like good or bad. There's no real bad positions for the most of it. And they do actually, they don't necessarily follow this law, this idea completely. But what they do is when things that are very similar to Stage Green's positions and ideals are presented, even if those positions are things that are completely radical in some ways, they might not necessarily agree or believe all of this, but they will start to incorporate it in a sense into their belief system. Because, well, part of it is due to how these radical groups work. A lot of them have taken words like diversity and inclusion, and they completely rebranded. They completely changed them around. They completely rebranded them. And change the definitions of them according to their own ideas of what diversity and inclusion is. Now, the problem here is that some of their ideas, while completely, in some ways, are incorrect and oversimplified, some of them are actually kind of correct. And the other problem is, as well, has to do with how the left operates. So, speaking as someone who used to be in Stage Green, used to be partly part of the left, but also not, because I was for a while very much Democrat, and I mean I was always registered independent, but I was believed in their ideals and still do in some ways. But this problem happened where these radical groups took over the left because the left wouldn't say no to them. They wouldn't stop them, because part of it is because of the ignorance of the masses of the left. The masses didn't understand what was happening. They thought, oh, these people are for diversity and inclusion. No, that's great. And then they don't realize what diversity and inclusion means to these people. And it's actually worse than this. Because of how the left has this position, and that's not completely wrong, but because they have this idea that there's no such thing as good or bad, or correct or incorrect, or something like along these lines, they've almost adopted these positions themselves because they can change their minds, they can come to different conclusions. Of course, they don't really do it in the way that I do it, which is basically by looking at the subject, looking at how it works and how it fits in with reality or doesn't, and then coming to the conclusion that way. They come to the conclusion by looking at it based on their own understandings and seeing how well it fits. If you want to know more about spiral dynamics Stage Green, I recommend a video from actualized.org called Spiral Dynamics Stage Green. There's about 6 videos that are on YouTube going over the different types of spiral dynamics, 7 different videos going over the different types of spiral dynamics there are. stage purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and turquoise. So when it comes to stage green, when it comes to these radical groups, they have basically completely taken over. Even though the establishment of the Democrats is still very much in power, because the left isn't just stage green; it's also a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, orange, depending on how establishment you are, or when you were born, or whatever. And so there's different degrees of left. There's some who are mostly orange, and maybe they're more right-wing, and some that are less orange and more green, and they're more moderately left-wing. So the left has been actually going more and more and more green, which is fine. But the problem is these groups, they take these different words and they completely change them around. Some people say that the left is kind of a religion. The problem with this idea is the idea of religion in the first place. There's a video from, I think it was Tim Pool who made it, about how the left was actually more of a non-theistic religion. And I suppose it's closer, but the only problem here is that you don't really know why this is happening, or what's causing this. Beyond the basics of, this group is taken over, and this type of thing. But if you don't really understand stage green and its faults and blind spots, you're going to be thinking something like, these people are dumb, and things like this. And then you have people who have this idea liberalism is a mental disorder, and they don't understand why this is happening. This is what happens when you don't have a whole lot of grounding. This is the problem. One of the problems that I had, and it's still kind of do with stage green, is that stage green doesn't have a whole lot of grounding with reality, to a large extent. Depending on how green you are. But a lot of stage green doesn't seem to have a whole lot of grounding into not only reality, but to more to, because one of the benefits of stage orange is their ability to be pragmatic and the ability to change. The problems with stage orange is, that they have the ability to change, but only to such a certain level. The problem with green is that they go a little too extreme with this, and they're not as pragmatic. They're more about protesting, and they're more about talking with each other and communicating these ideas, like in a circle or something. But they don't really have actions that work, and they don't really take actions that, even sometimes they don't even take actions that suit the stage green's ideas and values, especially if you're in Congress. A lot of the people who pretend to be, left and stage green are just trying to keep the system in place as long as they can, basically. So the left has some good points, some good ideas. So the other problem that happens here too is that because of Trump, in some ways this isn't really necessarily Trump's fault or even anybody's fault. so much as it is about how green reacts to stage red. For more information on what stage red is, you can watch the video Sprout Dynamics Stage Red. But you know, a lot of people who follow and like Trump might not like this idea, but Trump is actually very, in a lot of ways, stage red. He's also very stage orange, small amount of blue. So stage red is about dominating the competition with force, and you know, things like this. Sometimes you can kind of confuse red with orange. Orange does the same thing, but it does it in a less violent way, in a less chaotic way. That's why a lot of what Trump does is very chaotic, and it causes a lot of, you know, and can and does cause a lot of problems. But the other reason why this has happened, where they come into this problem, this rabbit hole, they don't even realize it, because of this blind, it's almost like a natural reaction to Trump, because Trump is very stage red, and he is not one of those people who vibe well with stage green, because green is about loving everybody, or you know, doing things for the fellow man, you know, trying to save the planet and stuff like this. And they don't always embody this perfectly and properly, but that's the ideal, anyways. So when they see somebody like Trump, who is almost completely opposite, where it's more about domination and control, and you know, shooting from the hip, which is what stage red can kind of do. It's more about gut reactions and things like this. But when they see this, it goes almost completely against their principles when it comes to stage green. Because red, one of the reasons is because red is individualist. So is orange. And so those two go against stage green, and stage green doesn't like it. But with orange and stage green, it's, you know, they have a problem with orange, but it's not in the same way as red, because you could almost have like this visceral reaction. I don't know if that's the right word, but a very strong automatic reaction to stage red if you're green, because of it basically goes against every single one of their principles. And sure, you have a lot of problems with stage orange against and blue against stage green, because they go against their principles as well of stage green and whatnot, but it's not to the same degree as stage red, because stage red has very crude and domineering way about it, that if you're not careful, especially if you're in stage green, you're going to be falling into this trap of, oh, this is, you know, the problem. And you know, a lot of these Trump people, and they're not wrong necessarily, but they don't understand why this is happening. You know, we're saying that the media is fake news, he's biased, and all these things. And while that's partly true, it's also, well, three things here to add. While that's partly true, it's also true that the media is sometimes right about Trump, but also in the wrong ways sometimes, a lot of times too, because they don't go deep enough, but that's another subject. So, why is it that a lot of the media is so almost blatantly wrong about things so often, especially when it comes to Trump? Um, Part of it has to do, well, some of it has to do with inaccuracies with Trump's media, but most of it, a lot of it has to do with different misunderstandings between the two sides. God damn it, I had it all formulated in my head and I forgot. So, and so most of it has to do with the different like disagreements and understandings from both sides of stage red and stage green. And that's what the bulk of why this so-called fake news happens, is because they don't completely understand and get why and get the things that are happening. Part of it also has to do with the ideology that they've fallen into, this rabbit hole of certain things, and so it causes them to only see very certain things rather than the whole picture and the whole panorama of things. And Trump, you could almost make the same argument for Trump. Trump is not, necessarily the smartest person in the world, whatever he wants you to believe. He's not, and he's not always correct or accurate with what he does and says. So I'm going to be correcting some understandings about what this so-called culture war is about, because some people think it's about Republican versus Democrat, libertarian versus authoritarian, and it is partly these things. And some people say, maybe it's about the ideologies of, whatever it might be. But I'm going to give you another explanation. Part of this has been explained before, but I'm going to go more in depth with it. I have to take a break on this one. We'll see how it happens, but it's not about Republican versus Democrat. I mean, sure, that's part of it. It's not about authoritarian versus libertarian. That's definitely part of it, though. What it is mostly about is Trump. Well, depending on which side you're looking at it from the media perspective, because they are definitely a part of this culture war. It's about Trump versus the media. It's about the ideology that the left has either embraced or just let take over the left, versus real world, and versus the rest of the spectrum, stage orange and blue. You can almost make the argument that this ideology is in some ways stage blue, because it's not really about stage green's principles so much as it about dogmas and a certain very rigid understanding of life and white people and things like this. So this causes problems, as you very well know. If you're watching and understanding things about this culture war, you're seeing this problem. So I don't really know what the solution is I don't know if the solution is to fix this problem, because there's such a deep divide and misunderstanding between these different parallels here, these different sides. Hopefully, though, this may bring more understanding about this problem to your attention so that you can look at things a little bit more with what may be a little bit of a broader perspective. Like, if you're a stage green person and you're dealing with this problem, I understand, I get it. And I'm not saying that your positions are wrong, because they're not completely wrong. And even when it comes to this ideology, its positions aren't completely wrong. They're oversimplified, and they're missing valuable points here. But they're not completely wrong. Neither is Trump completely wrong, neither is Republicans completely wrong, neither is any of these stages completely wrong. That's why it's important, I think, to move to yellow and even to turquoise, because at yellow you start to understand that these different sides, while sometimes inaccurate and sometimes problematic and have flaws, are not completely wrong and have their points and value systems that are partly correct. I forget exactly what I was going to say there, but have their points and their value systems, or I guess their value systems are sometimes partly correct. So, anyways, this is political ideas and thoughts, and hope this helps you to understand the left better. I could have gotten a lot deeper than I did here, but hopefully this is helping you to understand things a little bit more, with a little bit more perspective. Unfortunately, when it comes to stage green, they have a very almost a religious sort of thing that happens to them. Not in the usual senses of religion. They have a very emotional reaction and emotional motivation that can keep them from the truth, and that keeps them going, and can sometimes blind them to things that are correct but go against their ideas. All these stages can kind of do this to some extent, but in some ways I find that green is almost more susceptible to this, because of their ideas about, there's no good or bad or right or wrong, and so they can easily fall into a trap. But all the stages have this problem, so who knows? So anyways, this is political ideas and thoughts, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.